We now have about 15 or 20 minutes, and we can, that is to say, you can, ask Tom questions. And what I would like to do is suggest that you come up front, where there are two people with microphones, and your voice will be heard if you come right up here to the microphone. Please identify yourself. Let us know what you're associated with, the university or whatever, and please ask a question and not make a speech.
My name is Kevin Wensing. I'm a retired Navy captain. And Mr. Friedman, thanks for all the great work you do. And Mr. Kalb, thanks for putting this on tonight. A couple things. First, I've got a book here for Tom from Paul Brinkley, who worked with you a little bit. He built businesses in Iraq.
Yeah.
I have actually a two-part question. One is, how you know people around the world. How would you rate the trust factor? You talked about trust, which I agree with. How would you rate the trust factor of America in the world right now? And two, since we're in the press club, how does the international press look to the American press, and what's their assessment of that?
You know, it's a very fair question. It's a big question. It's hard for me to generalize about how the whole world, how much it trusts us or not. If you're Saudi Arabia right now and your fear is that we're going to make up with Iran, you don't trust us very much. You know, if you know if you're Japan and you're worried about China, maybe you trust us a lot because you have to. So I think it would be really hard to generalize. But I think that I kind of know what's behind your question, and on balance, you know, the trust level, if we could quantify it, you know, I think it's going down, not up. That's where the arrow's pointing. I'm sorry, the second question was?
What about the international press, how they look at, you know, the American press as a model?
Yeah, and again, I think it really is, it really depends, you know, and I think it depends both the country, the newspaper, the TV outlet, the radio, whatever, the specific journalist. I'd be reluctant to generalize. And there's international press here, you should ask them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. Yes, please.
Okay. Hi, Joan Michelson, Green Connections. One of the issues that you
Your
and I
name,
share.
please?
Oh, I did. Joan Michelson,
it.
Green
Sorry.
Connections, is energy and energy security. You mention it in your books, and obviously energy security and independence is critical to the future of this country, being its potential, and the freedom to and the freedom from. And then we have stories like the clean tech crash from 60 Minutes, and we have other journalism that is sometimes covering it, sometimes not.
Please ask your question.
Well, what is your assessment of the coverage? What are we missing? Mm-hmm. And can you give us your take on this component of the issue?
Well, again, I'm not going to, because I haven't looked at all the coverage, and I'm not going to, again, I would want to make a grand sweep on the coverage per se. I think it's a hugely important issue, and I think, you know, 60 Minutes did that story about the decline of clean tech, and the next week, you know, Google bought Nest, which is a, you know, amazing clean tech company for over $3 billion. So, you know, I think that's really, people really have to be careful about, I think, generalizing, you know, about some of these things. So I spend a lot of time covering climate, water, energy issues. I think it's hugely important. It's also, from a journalistic point of view, really interesting. I just, you've given me a chance to make a plug that I just completed a documentary with Showtime. It's called Years of Living Dangerously. And it's going to be an 8-part series that begins on April 13th. And I did the one on climate and environmental stresses and the Arab Spring, showing how underlying the Arab uprising were a lot of climate, water, and environmental stresses. They didn't cause it, but they contributed to it. Harrison Ford did deforestation in Indonesia. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger did forest fires. Matt Damon done the water issue. It's an amazing series, and we really hope it's going to be something that helps really rekindle interest and debate on this. I mean, coming over here, I think I mentioned to Marvin or somebody at our dinner, I don't know if you saw, it was 60 degrees in Sochi today. You know, in the Winter Olympics. And that's why I always use the term, I never use the term global warming, you know, not never, I try not to, because that like sounds so cuddly. Global warming, it sounds like golf in February, actually, to me. I much prefer Hunter Lovin's term global weirding, because what actually happens is the weather gets weird. And you get 2 feet of snow in New York, and you get 60 degrees in Sochi, and you get these really, the wets get wetter, the hots get hotter, the dries get drier. You see what's going on in California. And that's actually what climate scientists predict, is how climate change will unfold.
Tom, I'm going to ask you,
Please.
hang on a sec, please. I'm going to ask you to give answers that are a little
Gotcha,
more
more
brief,
concise, okay.
because we got so many people.
Okay, I'm gonna-
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Brian Bender with the Boston Globe's
Yeah.
Washington Bureau. Since we're talking about freedom, I'd be interested in your take on this. A lot of freedom post 9/11 was couched in terms of spreading freedom.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And much of that, or at least a good part of that, was by military force.
Yes.
And I'm curious your take on just kind of the lessons learned of the post 9/11
Yeah.
U.S. approach to spreading freedom. What did we do wrong? Where are we now, and what can we do to maybe improve that trust, which obviously is down in part because of that
Yeah.
reaction?
Thank you.
Hard to give a short answer to that very valid and important question. So many things went wrong in Iraq and Afghanistan. Hard to know where to start. The first was obviously one of the things that I think most went wrong in Iraq, which you can understand now, and you're talking to someone who really wanted that war to work, who believed in the opportunity and the necessity of trying to build an island of freedom in that part of the world, is that if you look at the Arab Springs today, which one have succeeded and which one not, and your questions, there's a long answer, but I'll just give you this part of it. There's one common denominator Tunisia has and Yemen have, and they're about the two doing the best, and that is the principle of no victor, no vanquished. That somehow everybody has to be included, including the ancien regime. And then you think about what we did in Iraq, which was not only decapitate Saddam, but also then go in and, through de-Baathification, wipe out the industry and jobs of a whole class of people. Then we fired the whole army. And so we came in and created a victor and a vanquished, which is exactly the wrong principle, and that's exactly why those Arab Springs that are failing now, it's really because of that. Because one side thinks, Sunnis in Iraq think they can have it all without Alawites. Shiites or Sunnis in Iraq think they can have it all without the other. I was speaking about Syria the first. So that was the biggest mistake of all.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, please.
Joe Annunziata, I'm a former White House foreign policy advisor. I want to ask you about the current Israeli-Palestinian discussions that are going on, and do you feel optimistic that there will be a final resolution to this debate that's been going on for decades?
So I'm more optimistic than I've been in a while, and that means I think the chances are 50-50. So that's what optimism really constitutes today. On the one hand, when I was just there last week, I just don't see how this current leadership on both sides can make the big lift, the huge concessions they have to make in order for a deal to be forged. And on the other hand, I don't see how they don't do it. Because what's really at stake here, to put it in the context of Middle East diplomacy, I truly believe, and there had to be some point, and we probably have said this way too many times, but I do believe that the Kerry mission will tell us whether the two-state solution is still possible. And John Kerry, I believe, is the last train. And the next train is the one coming at them.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Amelia Schister, and I'm working at Brookings. I wanted to sort of circle back to the freedom, and specifically freedom of the press. I did my graduate work in Europe, in Ireland specifically, and I found that the news coverage, the Irish Times and the Guardian and everything, was actually fairly different, the international coverage, than what we would get here. And when I spoke to my peers about it, they said, oh, well, your press is so censored. And so my question would be, do you sort of put any stock in that sort of snap judgment, or do you think it's more of an audience issue or just what we care about?
Yeah, again, I always try to avoid really gross generalizations like our press is censored, but I've certainly heard that. I went to graduate school in England, so I know what it's like to look at America from the outside in. And, you know, all I can tell you is like I served in Beirut, you know, with a lot of European correspondents and a lot of American correspondents, and we covered those stories very differently. And I don't think there's anything, I mean, I really disagreed sometimes with some take they might have. You know, you pick up the typical European press on Israel, for instance. It is just the baseline. It starts at a much higher level of hostility, not just skepticism, frankly. And so they might say, well, you're censored, you in America. You should, you know. And we might say, well, you start out with a bias. So what I like to do, that's why I like to read papers from all over the world. And I like to see everybody's perspective. But I'm not here, I can't pass judgment, wouldn't, on who's censored and who's just coming at it totally straight.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Linda Zhang, and I'm currently with CCTV America.
Uh-huh.
I'm an aspiring wartime journalist.
Great.
My question for you is about reconciling freedom as an ideology and freedom in practice. Because when you look at freedom on an international scale, it's very different from what's written in the First Amendment in America. If really people respected freedom so much, then someone would have intervened in the onset of the Rwanda genocide. And if you look at the activities of JSOC in the Middle East and Afghanistan, you know, the night raids and killings of innocent people in Iraq, Yemen, Somalia, how do you as a journalist reconcile that?
You know, everyone, one of the problems you always have in this job is people, and when you're a journalist as well, bad things happen all over the world all the time. Because bad things are happening, it doesn't always tell you what you should do. So for instance, you might say, we should have intervened in Rwanda. A lot of people felt that at the time, and there was a reporter that didn't have a column. But what we've already learned, like from some of our interventions already, like in Iraq and Afghanistan, that maybe we don't know what we're doing. And that sometimes, you know, intervention, that gets you through day one. You stop people from doing bad things. But I think what we've learned from, certainly what I've learned from the whole Middle East experience, we can stop people from doing bad things, but we can't always make them, in fact, we rarely can make them. In fact, maybe we can never make them do good things. And so once you get done stopping people doing bad things, which we did in Libya, for instance, we stopped what we thought was going to be a massacre in Benghazi. And, but then we didn't go in, and we couldn't make people do good things, and they then started fighting amongst themselves. So all I can tell you is my takeaway from the last 10 years is a lot more humility about these things too, and that if you will the ends, you better will the means. And the means might be a long-term, you know, presence, and that can lead to its own downside. So that would be my answer.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, please.
Thank you. Michael Nix, I did a graduate degree at the GW in international affairs. You mentioned your high regard for President Bush and his work in international. You also mentioned
The elder, yeah.
Bush the elder. You
Just
also
to
mentioned
clarify for
you
those
also
watching
mentioned
on
your Secretary Kissinger's work
Yeah.
in the Middle East. Looking at Bush the elder, does that high regard and respect also extend to his Secretary of State, Jim Baker?
Well, you know, I covered Jim Baker. I was actually the diplomatic correspondent, so I have a very high regard for the job he did as Secretary of State. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi there. My name is Nicholas Sorensen. I'm an undergraduate at GW, and I'm a great admirer of your column and your
Thanks so
writing
much.
and the Kalb report.
Really appreciate it.
And I was here for one session when Ted Koppel was the guest about the changing state of news, And while I read the New York Times a lot, I'm reading Al Jazeera and BBC more to avoid news written by cynics, as you said, and people watching their readership and writing for that group alone. How do you feel about how that's, with the creation of businesses like Fox News, that, and if our news...
No, we'll do just one question because we got other people.
Well, all I can tell you is that one of the sites I go, people often ask me like, hey, what do you read? So I get up in the morning, of course I read the New York Times first. And, but I read the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times. I definitely go through all of them online, I can't obviously read them cover to cover, and I get up early, so they aren't even there at my doorstep. But I really enjoy Real Clear Politics because it gives me a really wide range, and to one of the questions over here, international opinion, and as a kind of one-stop shop of some Al Jazeera, some Beirut Daily Star, some Haaretz, some Der Spiegel, and so I'm a news junkie, and I'm an opinion news junkie. So I love reading opinion, and I love reading other people's opinion, and I love reading a wide range of opinion. And I try to every once in a while. I don't have time, and I'm not going to do it as a habit because it just can be, you have to do a lot of preparation. But Al Jazeera asked me last year to be on their head-to-head debate show, which is filmed at the Oxford Union Debating Society with Mehdi Hassan. They're really tough, challenging debater. And the issue of debate was, is America a force for good in the world? And I took the affirmative, okay, on Al Jazeera at the Oxford Union Debating Society. Now, I do that to test myself. And I also I think it's really important when you sit where I sit, to give people a shot at you every once in a while, something like Bush and Cheney never did. Their idea of a public oration event was go to the Heritage Foundation and have no questions, and so, again, it's not something I'm going to do all the time, but I believe from time to time you should do that. So,
We have time, I think, just for 2 questions. I want you to know that. Go ahead, please.
Hi, James Tyson, Brookings. Thanks for your talk.
Thanks.
You mentioned early on, I think, a quote, and I don't remember the exact one, but it was something along the lines of those who give up their freedom to preserve their security deserve neither.
That was one of the introducers, yeah.
Okay. Well, anyhow, I was wondering, I wanted to get your take on that because my feeling is that something freedoms are something we've given up in favor of security, and I'm wondering whether you believe that there's any way, and if there is, what way people might be convinced to give up their security to preserve values.
Thank you.
So it's a very important question, and all I can do is go back to what I said. My overwhelming reaction to the whole Snowden affair is 2 things. This was inevitable, and it is healthy that we have this discussion, okay? Because if you see where technology is going now, it is leaping ahead as the world gets hyper-connected, so much faster than human beings can adapt and adjust. But at the same time, I think you got to be aware. I go back to why am I seeing golf swing ads in Haaretz? That people are voluntarily giving up, or in my case, not voluntarily giving up, freedom and information that is then being used and crammed at me. And I think we have to have a very big discussion about this.
Last question, please.
Thank you for the discussion. Bill Clifford with the World Affairs Councils of America. You mentioned your concern if America goes dark. I'd like you to assess the American education system and how good it does a job of keeping the lights on, of creating globally minded citizens. What would be the prescriptions to do a better job?
That's not a question. That's like a whole new Kalb report. I think that, and I do write about this occasionally. If you go by the, international, PEAS exams and whatnot, we have work to do. But what I find, I write about education a lot. I'm not an educator. I just play one on TV.
Yeah.
And that I'm actually interested in American power. That got me interested in economics. That got me into industry. That got me into jobs. And that takes you into education. And so I kind of backed into it. But I would just say that I think we have a lot of work to do. There's no question about it. I think the single most important issue in my view is parenting, that parents who instill a love of learning in their kids and hold them to high expectations, and everything else, teacher ed reform, technology is third, fourth, and fifth as far as I'm concerned. I just end, Marvin, by saying one thing. First of all, these are great questions. I dodged as many as I could, but this issue of pessimism and optimism is run through, and so I'll leave you with a story. My column does run in Haaretz, and fairly regularly. They don't run every one, but they run it regularly. And I don't know, 8, 9 years ago, I was in Israel having dinner with the editor of Haaretz, and I said to him, "Why do you run my column?" And he said, "Tom, you're the only optimist we have." And I was getting up to go to the dinner table, and the Israeli General Uzi Dayan was at my side, and he said, "I know why you're an optimist." And I said, "Why?" He said, "It's because you're short." And I said, "Short?" He said, "Yeah, you can only see that part of the glass that's half full." Okay. So the truth is, I'm not so short, but I am still an optimist. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all very, very much for coming. Thank you, Carl. God bless. Thank you very much, everybody. That's it.